Hello, this is the instructional message video to all the recipients of the nuts from the Vermont and Hampshire nut offering for 2021. Right now it's March 13th, I think, and I'm going to be putting nuts in the mail to you Monday. Today's Saturday, so Monday go out in the mail. I would suspect you'll get them Wednesday or Thursday. The temperatures are supposed to have warmed up by then, so they shouldn't freeze outside. If possible, get them out of your outside mailbox as soon as you can so they don't freeze. If they freeze, we'll get you some more. So where to start? You're going to be getting nuts, and I think if you can get this through, my wife is running the video, so we're trying. So right here we have what you will not be getting. These are horse chestnuts or buckeyes, and they do look a lot like American chestnut. They're dried up. They have a big white section that was light section that was where it was attached to the burr, and they generally come one or two, and a lot of times people get confused, but a few spikes, horse chestnuts. So we're looking for chestnuts, and chestnut burrs vary all the way from an American-sized chestnut burr to a small American-sized chestnut burr to a pretty good-sized one. Some of them get as big as softballs, and they tend to be European or Asian hybrids if they have large burrs. Inside the burr are 3 nuts. This one has not shed the nuts, and if you look real closely at the tip of each nut, you can see a little well, it almost looks like a little tail. That's actually the stigma style pistil from the female parts, and you will see that on the individual nuts you get in the mail. So just keep in mind that the very tips will show. So a big nut like this tends to be European. You'll get them in the store, or twice as big. This is much more of an American chestnut size. Some are larger, but they're not very big. There's a red oak acorn I just found in the ground today, and there's a fertile American chestnut, and here is an infertile. People always wonder, well, how can you tell? The infertile have no third dimension. They're flat. They're like all the air has been sucked out of them. A fertile one has 3 dimensions to it, but they all have the remnants of the female flower on the end of them that was pollinated. So what you're going to get, and we have to go over here to the refrigerator, and things are not terribly neat here, but this is how the nuts have spent the winter. They've been in here all winter in these plastic bags or pots. Lots of thermometers. In fact, I've got 4 thermometers here, because what happens is they don't agree, and so you got to figure out which one's telling the right temperature. That says 38. This one says 32. This one says 35. And then here's one out of a laboratory, and this should be the most accurate, and that's saying just above 32. Look at the rooster. He wants to come here and try one of the chestnuts. Sorry, buddy. We all owe a big debt of gratitude to Mark Meal and his friend Dave Lent in Massachusetts, who collects most of these wild type American chestnuts. They're phenomenal. They track them down all summer, go in the fall, beat the squirrels to it, figure out how to get them out of the trees or collect them. Meticulously labeled. This first one I just happened to grab says harvested 2020, Mark Meal, Dave Lent. Custom tree identification, Mohawk tree. There are 14 nuts in here. There's an big long ID number. The address is 70 Mohawk Path, Holliston, Mass. And the coordinates. So there's the GPS coordinates. These were stored without any peat moss in them. And it's an experiment, because most everybody, they recommend you put peat moss to keep them moist. I know one person that does this who doesn't add peat moss, so this was an experiment. Most of these have spent the winter with moist with moist peat moss in them. So we're going to grab a few of these, and I'll show you what you're going to be getting in the mail. By the way, we keep our apples in here, and they, I know I've read it's best not to keep apples with chestnuts. They give off some kind of a gas that might not be great stored together. We might have to ask and believe. Hey buddy, go on. Go on. Go on. Go on, go on, go on, go on. Go on. This is our attack rooster. Okay, so I take my trusty little pan, which I'm going to grab right here, and hey, just got tapped. Okay, gonna pour them out. This isn't gonna work very well. Come on, buddy, go on. Come on, out, 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 go on. That's funny. They think they've been buried by a squirrel under the duff in the forest, and they know from, however, daylight temperature, that it's time to start growing. A lot of these will have little roots, a radical that has started to grow down. So if I tip them over in the middle of the winter or stir them up too much, sometimes that radical will get twisted. So with luck, these will have a little radical, or, so we'll take a look here. So let's see what I can find. Now that nut right there, I would suspect maybe is not terribly wild type, because it's quite large, but an American chestnut can certainly get that large. I can feel the radical right here, but what's confusing, if you can see the little, it's like a little tiny horsetail sticking up there, the female part. Sometimes people think that's a sprout. Not at all. That's just left over. But the root, the radical, and it's confusing because we say, well, these nuts have started to sprout, but they haven't really started to sprout, because a sprout is what grows up and turns into the tree. This is the root that grows down, the radical. And the radical will often get 6, 8, 10 inches long before the sprout pokes up through the dirt. So the trick for you is to try and get that radical, the tip of it's right there, pointing down in the peat moss. Now we'll take, here's a better one. Hey, there's a good one. I don't know what's the best way. There's the radical right there. So you want to, if you planted the nut in the pots with this pointed up, it takes quite a while for the geotropic hormones to tell the root to make a U-turn and head down, and sometimes it brings the nut out of the ground, and sometimes you get a very weird root system. So you always want to get that radical pointing down, whatever it takes. Sometimes you'll plant the nut upside down because the radical's already started to head this way. But most of the time, when in doubt, plant them on their side. So here we have 1, 2, and, well, let's plant these 2. Here are the different pots, big to small. These are what we call Stewie pots. It's the company that makes them. A lot of people make them, but they're root growing, they're air pruning pots. The idea being the roots come down, they hit a lot of air, it dries out, and the roots go whoops, and they circle rather than trying to grow out through and down into the whatever your pot is sitting on. So what we use is the middle size right here. This holds 0.6 of a gallon of peat moss. One of the troubles is they don't want to stand upright. So we buy these pots that hold 9 of them quite handily. It holds 9 of them. I'll show you upstairs. What I recommend you do, for those of you that are getting pots in the mail with seeds, is that you go to a hardware store, Home Depot, wherever, and get a milk carton. You can get them for this is a real milk carton, from Rutland, Vermont. All right, that's where our second GCO is going in. Get one of these pots, pot holders. There'll be 9 of them. here's a bucket of moist peat moss. So gets a little confusing because we're going to use the pure straight peat moss. I'm going to use that to ship the nuts to you. We're going to use growing mix, which is mostly peat moss, but with the white perlite and vermiculite mixed in. It comes powder dry, even though these bales are heavy. This bale here I just picked up yesterday. They're $36, but it makes a lot by the time you add water. I cut the bale in half. I put it in this bucket. I chop it up with a flat shovel, but a spade works fine too. This is awfully good because you can get it all stirred up. It takes a whole 5 gallons of water. Whole 5 gallons of water. I happen to use hot water because we have an outdoor shower right there. It takes 5 gallons of water to get half of this bale wet. There's no real secret to it. You just want it so when you squeeze it, the water doesn't come out, but you can definitely feel the water coming out between your fingers. You don't want it too wet. In this case, it doesn't really matter because we're going to be putting the nut in, taking it upstairs, filling it full of water, and putting them in the sunlight to grow. So, take one of these, you fill it up. I used to pack the soil in. You're a trained chicken. I just tap it down, and I like to leave 1.5 inches on top. I'll show you why afterwards. Don't fill it too full. Tap it down, sometimes tap it on the ground. That's a little, right about there. Then, I'm going to take the nuts, or you're going to take the nuts that you get in the mail. This is the one with a nice radical pointing down. Very simply, just make a little hole with your finger, or you can just stick it on top. You want it to end up at the depth a squirrel would put it, whatever that is in there. I'm sure it's not always the same. This one, if I can feel that radical pointing that way. So I'm going to point it, lay it on its side, lay it there, and then I'm going to put a little soil on top. Some people don't do that, you just poke it down in the ground further. And then I just give it a little pat, and that is it. It is simple. Remember, these nuts really want to grow. This is just packed full of food. That's why every animal in the world, in the forest, wants a chestnut, and why you have to be so careful, because even these chickens would dig them up. A chipmunk, a squirrel, a turkey, a crow, a bear, a deer, everybody will eat chestnuts. There's a lot of food in there. I have done this in the past. I've taken some, and I put it right here. I've taken some, oh, that's funny. There, right here. This is just to make an example. Pure beach sand, washed sand, 100% pure sand. You fill a pot with sand. You take your chestnut, put it in the sand, and water it. That will grow fine. It will grow about this tall, 6, 8 leaves, using up the sugars and the food that's in the nut. I've grown them in pure sawdust. There's a bag of sawdust for the chickens there. It'll grow in sawdust. It'll grow in sand. They're not that fussy. They want to grow. There are plenty of things you can do that will make them not grow well, but remember, they want to grow. If you take an elm seed, I had one here, it looks like a little piece of oatmeal. Well, it grows into as big a tree as a chestnut, but there's very little food in that seed. So things have to be exactly right where it falls. And it has to get the right amount of moisture and the right amount of sun and start making photosynthesis right away. Not so with the chestnut. They've got all kinds of reserves in them. So, let's see, what else do I need to cover? Okay, here's what you're going to get in the mail. This is real tree mail. I like that. You have tree mail. We'll see. I mean, this is first year. I've taken, I'll send you, depending on how many nuts we can send to each person, we have 30 people that want them, and we have about 250 nuts, and we have to save some for other uses. But I'll send you 6 or 8 or 9 of these stewie pots. I do this exactly like this. I will take the plastic bag, I will put peat moss, not that the growing medium wouldn't work, but I take peat moss that I've done the same thing, added moisture to, and then I take your 6 or 8 chestnuts and put them in. I'll be a little more careful for the actual one. Try and make sure they're down in there. I put it in the pot. Whoops. I put it in the two beauties of this. It will very well insulate it between the bubble wrap and the peat moss and the layers of air in this. I think it could sit outside for a good long time and not freeze. I do that. I put tape over it. Tape it up. I took it down to the post office and I said, would you actually mail these? And they said, sure. I'm not even putting a return address. My wife, Sue, carefully made up all the mailing labels, and if you gave me the right address, then it'll get to you. Be in the mail Monday morning. You should get them Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, who knows. If things go wrong, if they freeze, let me know, and we ought to be able to replace them. That's the beauty of these wild type chestnuts. They're not terribly precious. So, see if there's anything else that I forgot I was going to say here. I think I'll get this in the mail, in the email to you all, so that you can be thinking. Now, if you're going to make your own pots, the only thing you really have to be careful of is to make sure you have good holes in the bottom. So if you're using what's recommended, 2-quart milk containers, somebody said I'm going to use Pringle cans. I think a Pringle can this big around isn't the best choice, even though this is what many chestnuts are grown on, these little bullet tubes, and they do okay. It's just that they dry out quickly. I don't think it's a great route to go for if you're only growing a few chestnuts. So you can get a pot like this. Well, right here, let me just grab it. You can get a pot like this at your hardware store or feed store for about, they're pretty cheap. You can get them for sometimes 30 cents each. And they're not bad, but I'll show you in the next video, that root, the root, is going to grow all the way down to the bottom of the pot before anything comes out of the ground. It's almost bizarre when you actually see it. Here's a couple of examples of why you want to get your root growing well. There's the root system of a chestnut from our nursery that I cut off, shook the soil off. You can see the original potting material in here. It's a pretty good root system with actually a taproot that's coming down. Here's a poor thing, and I'm not sure how this happened. This thing got totally root bound. I almost think it was maybe a throwaway that just kept growing. Very hard to kill a chestnut. I sawed it off, and a month later, or two, up come the sprouts. You can run over a chestnut with your lawnmower and they will re-sprout. They really want to grow. But these roots have circled and circled, and if you gave it enough sunlight, it would probably do fine. Remember, in the woods, 1 out of 1,000,000 nuts actually makes it to be a mature tree, and we're trying to get every one of our nuts to grow. Here's another tree. There's a nice 3-year-old tree, well labeled, nice center stem, and you can see right here, died of the blight. The blight circled it, killed it, but the reason I saved it was it's got a pretty good taproot. That's a pretty good root system on that tree right there, so that's really what you're going for, minus the blight. Okay, I'm sure I'll think of things afterwards, but just as a reminder, here is all the detail that went into the nuts that you're going to be receiving. There's 18 different separate mother trees. A few in New Hampshire, Vermont, mostly from Massachusetts. I'm not sending you the provenance of these nuts. Maybe next year if people get good at it and like to do it. But right now I'm just going to mix and match and try and make sure that I've got some good looking nuts in each bag. They're wild type. They will get the blight someday. It might be after we're long gone. I have one in my side yard here that's 25 or 30 years old. It's beautiful. I've got some that are only 6 years old that have gotten the blight. The younger they are, the more they tend to grow. They without getting the blight. Their bark doesn't have as many cracks. The spores don't get in. So if you get your tree growing happily, and we'll talk about that in another video, you can expect to get a lot of enjoyment out of watching it grow and getting good at it. So good luck. Hope you get your mail. If you haven't had anything by Thursday or Friday, I'm actually not going to be around after next Saturday for a while. I'm going somewhere. But if you don't get it, then let me know and I'll figure something out.